The lady by the water. I should have never walked that way alone. The streets of the old town had always carried a strange heaviness at night, but that evening, the air seemed denser, almost too heavy to breathe. The lamps lining the canal were few and far between, their glow soft and uncertain, as if they were struggling to push back the darkness that swallowed the narrow streets. The water was silent, but not calm. It shifted in uneasy ripples, reflecting slivers of dull yellow light that bent and stretched with every movement. I remember the smell before anything else. Damp stone, old wood swollen from centuries of moisture, and the faint metallic tang that always seemed to linger near the canal, as if the water still carried the memory of rusted iron and forgotten blood. The cobblestones beneath my shoes were slick, almost oily, and each step echoed too loudly, as though I had disturbed a silence that did not want to be broken. The night was windless. No leaves stirred. No water lapped against the canal walls. It was a silence that felt intentional, as though the city itself was holding its breath. It was then, through the stillness, that I noticed her. At first, I thought it was nothing more than a trick of the dim light, a figure unmoving, standing in the middle of the bridge ahead. She was small, framed by the iron railing and the dark water below. Her dress was pale, flowing down to her ankles, though it seemed wrong for the season, thin, almost translucent fabric that clung to her form as though wet. I told myself it must have been a local, someone who had wandered out late. But something about the way she stood made me falter. She wasn't shifting her weight, wasn't looking at her phone, wasn't even breathing, as far as I could tell. She was simply there, fixed in place, as though she had always belonged to that bridge. The lamps nearest to her flickered faintly, their glow bending around her shape, never quite illuminating her fully. I could make out the outline of long hair spilling down her back, strands that glistened like damp threads. I should have turned back, but instead I kept walking, pulled by that same morbid curiosity that makes people slow down at the scene of an accident. The closer I came, the stranger it felt. The air seemed colder around the bridge. A sharp chill seeped into my skin, crawling along my arms like icy fingers. My footsteps, so loud before, began to sound muffled, as if the stones themselves were swallowing the noise. And then I smelled it. It was faint at first, just the suggestion of something sweet, like wilted flowers soaked in stagnant water. The scent grew stronger with every step, until it became almost suffocating, cloying, rotten. My stomach tightened, and I tasted copper at the back of my throat. I reached the foot of the bridge. She hadn't moved. Her back was to me, the pale dress clinging to her thin frame. Her arms hung limp at her sides, fingers barely curled, motionless. I waited, expecting her to turn, to acknowledge my presence, but she did not. The water below was black, but restless. Gentle ripples broke against the stone edges, though the air remained still. It sounded less like water and more like whispering, low and constant, just beneath the surface. I wanted to call out, but no sound left my lips. My throat was tight, strangled by a fear I hadn't yet admitted to myself. I took one step onto the bridge. That was when she moved. Not her whole body, just her head. Slowly, painfully slowly, it tilted to one side, as though her neck had stiffened from centuries of stillness. The hair fell away from her face in damp strands, and I saw the curve of her cheek, too pale against the shadows. The lamps flickered harder, their light fading in and out, and for a moment it felt as if the bridge was isolated, floating in a void. No sound, no world, just her and the black water beneath us. Her head tilted farther, unnaturally far, until I heard the faintest crack like brittle wood breaking. My chest clenched, every muscle in my body screaming for me to move, but I was rooted in place. Then she turned. Her face, what I could see of it, was not whole. The skin seemed stretched thin, almost translucent, veins dark beneath the surface. Her eyes were sunken, yet they glistened wetly, reflecting a light that wasn't there. Her mouth was slightly open, lips pale and colorless, as if she had been caught mid-breath centuries ago and never exhaled. She did not look at me, not directly. Her gaze was cast downward toward the water, and then in one sudden motion she stepped sideways. Not away from me, not across the bridge, into the canal. There was no splash, no sound of impact, just a ripple that spread outward, circling slowly, as though the water had swallowed her gently without resistance. The lamps steadied, their light growing warmer, as though nothing had happened. The bridge was empty. I forced myself to cross, though every nerve in my body screamed that I should not. My feet felt heavy, and each step dragged against the stones. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to glance into the water, but the smell followed me, the sickly sweet rot, the iron tang. When I finally reached the other side, I looked back. The bridge was empty, still harmless. The water gleamed softly under the lamps, calm as glass. But the ripples were still spreading. They spread wider and wider, though nothing had disturbed the surface. My heart pounded as I realized they weren't fading. They were moving toward me. I turned and fled, running down the narrow street, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't stop until the lamps grew brighter, until the old buildings gave way to modern streets where people still walked and laughed as though the night was ordinary. But even then, I could smell it, the faint trace of flowers rotting in stagnant water. And I knew she had seen me. I avoided that canal for weeks, months, but curiosity, or perhaps something darker, eventually pulled me back. When I stood there again, beneath the same flickering lamps, the water was still. No woman on the bridge, no unnatural silence. But when I leaned closer to the railing, I thought I saw something just below the surface. Not a reflection, not a shadow. Eyes. Watching. Waiting. And then the ripples began again. The midnight bell. The sound came at an hour when no bell should have rung. I remember that night more vividly than any other in my life. I had wandered through the narrow streets of the old town, a place where every stone seemed older than memory itself. The sky was overcast, the moon hidden behind a blanket of low clouds, and the air was thick with the kind of damp chill that seeps into your bones no matter how tightly you wrap your coat around you. The tower stood above everything, as it always had, ancient and silent, its spire piercing the night like a black finger pointing into the heavens. I had always been drawn to it. There was something magnetic about its sheer presence, about the way it seemed to watch over the city, not like a guardian, but like an overseer, indifferent and unblinking. The streets around it were unusually empty that night. Shops shuttered, windows dark, only the occasional lamp casting a cone of yellow light that dissolved into the mist. My footsteps echoed against the cobblestones, each strike of my shoes amplified in the stillness, until it began to sound like I wasn't walking alone. The closer I drew to the tower, the more I noticed the silence. It wasn't ordinary silence, it was the absence of everything. No wind, no rustle of leaves, not even the distant murmur of water that usually drifted up from the canals. It was as though the entire city had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. And then the bell rang. It was so sudden that I felt it in my chest before I even processed the sound. A single toll, deep and resonant, rolling through the streets like a wave. It didn't sound like metal striking metal. It was too heavy for that. It was as though the air itself had been struck, vibrating, trembling. I froze where I stood, my breath caught halfway in my throat. Midnight bells were nothing unusual in a city like this. Towers had kept time for centuries. But I knew the truth. The mechanism had been dismantled long ago. The tower's bells had not rung in decades. And yet there it was. The echo stretched on too long, bouncing from wall to wall until it was impossible to tell where it had originated. It seemed to spiral inward, growing denser rather than fading, pressing into my ears, into my skull, until the world around me was nothing but that hollow, impossible tone. I forced myself to move closer, though each step felt heavier than the last. My shoes scraped against the stones now, muted and hesitant, as though the ground itself didn't want to carry me forward. The smell of damp stone intensified as I neared the tower. It was sharp mineral, mixed with something older, dust, would rot, the faint sting of mildew, the scent of things that had been left alone for too long. The tower loomed above me, its surface blackened with centuries of soot and rain. Its windows were nothing but hollow eyes staring down, some broken, some sealed, but all empty. The base was surrounded by iron railings, rusted and flaking, yet still strong enough to bar entry. Beyond them, the great wooden doors sagged on their hinges, bound by thick chains that had turned orange with age. The bell rang again. This time it was louder, closer. My entire body shuddered with the vibration, and I could almost feel it pulling at my insides, like the sound had weight, dragging me toward the tower whether I wished it or not. I stared at the doors, at the chains that should have made the place silent forever, and yet the sound poured from within as though the walls themselves were breathing it out. There was no one else in the square, no footsteps, no witnesses, just me and the tower, and the sound that should not have been possible. I told myself it had to be an echo from somewhere else, perhaps another church hidden beyond the fog. But the longer I stood there, the more certain I became. The sound was not traveling from a distance, it was emanating from directly above me. Another toll. The third strike was the worst. It was not a clean note this time. It dragged, distorted, like metal bending under impossible pressure. The pitch wavered, dipped, and for the briefest moment, it sounded less like a bell and more like a human voice, a long, drawn-out groan buried beneath layers of iron. I felt my skin crawl. The hairs on the back of my neck lifted, and the air grew so cold I could see faint clouds with every exhale. The silence after the sound was worse than the toll itself. It was expectant, hungry. The lamps around the square flickered, their halos shrinking until the shadows pressed closer, swallowing the stones. For a moment, the only light came from the tower itself, thin, pale streaks spilling out from the cracks around the doors and windows, glowing faintly, as if something inside was burning without flame. The fourth toll was not heard so much as felt. It shook the ground, rattled the railings, made the air hum. The glow brightened for just a second, and I thought I saw movement in one of the broken windows high above. A flicker, a shadow against the pale light. My legs trembled, and every instinct screamed to run. But I stood there, transfixed, like an insect caught in amber. The fifth toll came softer, almost mournful. The note dragged downwards, fading into a sigh. The light inside the tower dimmed, leaving only the oppressive darkness. The silence stretched on. My ears strained against it, waiting, dreading. And then nothing. Minutes passed. The lamp steadied. The square returned to its ordinary stillness. The tower was nothing more than an old, silent monument once again. I should have left then. I should have turned my back and never returned. But I couldn't. The sound had lodged itself inside me, thrumming against my chest like a second heartbeat. That night, when I finally returned home, I thought I had left it behind. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound returned, not from outside, not from the city, but from within the walls of my room. One toll, soft, hollow, inside my head. I do not sleep easily anymore. The tolling comes without warning, sometimes faint, sometimes deafening, always at midnight, always when I am alone. And sometimes, when I dare to glance at the window, I see the faint outline of the tower reflected in the glass, though my room looks out in the opposite direction. It is always there waiting, and the bell never stops,